Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I think some people are just trickling in person. And so in the meantime, before we start, we'll start in like a minute or two. People virtually, if you would like to introduce yourself, you're welcome to introduce yourself via your organization and your name if you're comfortable doing so. And for some of our speakers joining virtually, I would highly recommend, if you would like to start to get the ball rolling.
Can I ask my two panelists to come up too?
Want us to come up here and join you?
Yes, please. Yeah. Grace, I think you and Melody are starting off, aren't you?
Yes, Molly gets it and do a bit of
Yes.
introduction.
Hi, Chloe and our speakers in the room. If we're all set to go, I can just start with a couple things at the start just for housekeeping and turn it over to you. Right. Great. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Malvika Randive and I'm program coordinator here with SID-US. And thank you for joining us with this event that is hosted by the Democracy, Rights and Governance Workgroup with a lot of support and collaboration from the Center for Values in International Development and from Georgetown University as well. And just a couple of things to note for today. If you're not familiar with us, SID-United States, we are the largest and the most active chapter of the Society for International Development, an international network that was founded in 1957 to serve as a global forum dedicated to sustainable economic, social, and political development. We serve as a global town square for the international development community, bringing together people from diverse organizations, disciplines, and career stages in a neutral, independent forum to share information and discuss important issues and challenges facing our community. A few ways that you can get involved with us. You can check out some of our upcoming events and sign up for a weekly newsletter by visiting www.sid-us.org. You can also apply to be an intern or volunteer co-chair and stay tuned for other volunteer opportunities that we have. You can also follow us on social media to know what we're up to. A few things to note for today. This session is recorded and the recording will be sent to all registered attendees in person and virtual. And we will be sharing it through our social media channels and our networks. Live transcription, closed captioning is available for the session today. And if you have any questions for our speakers, especially all of our virtual attendees, please post them in the chat box and we'll try to get them over to our speaker. Our co-chairs for the Democracy, Rights and Governance Workgroup are Barbara Smith and Patrick Quirk, and you'll be hearing from Patrick later today. And I'll turn it over to our moderator for today, Dr. Chloe Schwenke with the Center for Values and International Development.
Thank you very much. I will very quickly turn it over to Anna Malavisi as our first a welcome speaker.
Oops, I can't hear her. She's muted.
Anna, you're muted, I think.
Myself. Okay, I think can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. Well, welcome. My name is Anna Malavisi, and I'm the Vice President for the Center for Values in International Development. I'm also an associate professor in philosophy here at Western Connecticut State University, where I'm right now, about to teach later on. So I'd like to give a warm welcome to everyone to this hybrid event on deliberative democracy, a necessary and viable option. And first of all, I'd like to thank the co-sponsors, the Global Human Development Program at Georgetown University, Walsh School of Foreign Service, and the Governance Working Group at the Society for International Development. I'd also like to note the significance of this event this morning as a lead up to the upcoming second summit for democracy, which is taking place next week, March 29th and 30th, which is co-hosted by the US government, together with the governments of Costa Rica, the Netherlands, Republic of Korea, and the Republic of Zambia. Well, just a couple of words to get us thinking about this. I'm sure you're all aware of the fragile state of democracy today. According to a New York Times article, more democracies are declining and even sliding into autocracy today than at any point in the last century. We are at a crucial geopolitical context. In many countries, a poor, weak, or even pseudo form of democracy is present where the voices and participation of many people for reasons such as race, gender, sexual identity, ethnicity, ability, religion, are excluded from the democratic process, or at least their rights are not recognized in the same way as others. So in other countries, democracy is threatened with the rise of nationalist and authoritarian governments and political parties. So it's clear that striving for democracy alone is not enough. Very much depends on the type of democracy that exists, which leads us to the topic of today's event, deliberative democracy. The noun deliberation is defined as a long and careful consideration or discussion. So some research conducted by some Stanford scholars, James Fishkin and Larry Diamond, has shown that deliberative democracy, an informed and moderated discussion that transcends partisan identities, can lead to a depolarized and more democratic society. I think it also helps us understand the factors that contribute to a failing or an ineffective type of form of democracy. I'm sure our panelists will have much more to say about this. So enjoy the event. And now I'll pass it over to Professor Stephen Radelet from Georgetown University. I'm assuming that he's there.
Yes, indeed.
Hiding here. Good. Thank you. Morning. I'm Steve Radelet. I'm the director of the Global Human Development Program here at the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown. And I just want to welcome you to the university and all of you in that camera in there from around the world. We welcome you this morning. I want to thank several people. I want to thank the Mortara Center for giving us this space for free, which is nice to have it. I want to thank my colleague Grace Lee in the back, who has done all the work to get this organized and getting the equipment working flawlessly. If we don't notice any glitches, that means Grace has once again done superlative work. So thank you. Thanks, Grace, for that, for all you've done. I want to thank Chloe and everyone at the Center for Values and International Development. Chloe's an old friend, and it's great to collaborate on this. And she even loaned her son Ian to us as a student for 2 years in our graduate program, which was great fun. He's really terrific. We have a 2-year program in development, a master's program where we take students from all around the world, pretty small cohort, 30 students a year, very selective, but we give them training in economics, quantitative methods, political economy, and management. And then they can specialize in courses in democracy, in governance, in climate change, in education, whatever their particular area of specialization might be. And so that's what brings us all here together. This is such an important topic and such an important timing for this topic with the summit coming up next week. Well done. Timing is everything, as they say. I do a lot of work. I look at big macro trends in development. I'm a macroeconomist, and I think a lot about long-term future. And we all know there's been a lot of progress in developing countries over the last 20 or 30 years. We all know that that's under threat and at risk, and that there's been a lot of backsteps in the last few years, obviously around COVID, but also around climate change, but also around democracy. And when I am asked what I see as the biggest threats to global progress in the next 10 or 15 years, there are two that just, in my mind, far and away are the biggest threats, especially to global poverty. One is obviously climate change, but the other is democracy. And the weakening state of democracy. There had been such progress for 20-25 years, but now we're seeing the backstepping that we've already heard about, that you all know about around the world, not everywhere. There are some countries that are forging ahead. But to me, when I think about the future of development, this is at the core, because deliberative democracy is how decisions are made. And if we're going to continue global progress in fighting poverty, in reducing conflict, in fighting climate change and environmental degradation, you have to have a strong decision-making progress, It has to be deliberative so that all of society gets involved, and it gives it the legitimacy that is necessary. So this is really great timing and one of the most important issues that I can think of. I wish that I could stay for all of this. I just got back from 2 weeks of travel, and I have a large pile of appointments and other things that I have to take care of. I literally just flew in over the weekend from Nepal, so it's a long way away. And as I mentioned to Chloe, it's a good thing this is in the morning, because if we were meeting at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I'd be falling asleep. So I'm glad the timing worked out well. So with that, I will leave it to you. Thank you all for being here, and thanks for having me as well.
Thank you so
Over to
much,
you.
Steve. Much appreciated. Patrick online.
Yes, I am.
Excellent.
morning.
Over to you, Patrick.
Just a brief word of welcome. My name is Patrick Quirk. I'm the Vice President for Strategy, Innovation, and Impact at the International Republican Institute, nonpartisan organization whose mission is to support democracy overseas. Also the co-chair of the DRG work group with SID. Wanted to thank Chloe, friend, former colleague many years ago, and her center, as well as Georgetown, for co-hosting this important discussion on the eve of the second summit. I'm very much looking forward to all of the panelists' comments. So back to you, Chloe, and thank you.
Thanks so much, Patrick. Today we are joined by 3 panelists, and I'm going to very briefly introduce to each of them with a quick bio, and then each one of them is going to get 3 minutes. I'll try to be strictly, probably not, to just summarize where they're coming from on the topic of deliberative democracy. I'll start with David Crawford. I have a particular connection with David. He was my doctoral dissertation mentor, so we go back a long way. He's Professor Emeritus at the School of Public Policy at the University of Maryland. He specializes in socio-political philosophy, international development ethics, transitional justice, democracy and democratization, and the ethics of consumption. After 3 degrees from Yale University, David taught philosophy for 25 years at Colorado State University, where he established one of the world's first courses in ethics and international development. He was a visiting professor at the University of Munich, was twice a Fulbright Scholar at the University of Costa Rica, held the UNESCO Chair in Development at the University of Valencia in Spain, and taught at the National Autonomous University of Honduras, the University of Chile, and the University of the Andes in Colombia. He's been a consultant with the Inter-American Development Bank, well, we actually were both there together, USAID, the World Bank, and the International Center for Transitional Justice. David was also the founder and former president of the International Development Ethics Association, IDEA, and he's also a board member at the Center for Values in International Development. We're also joined today online by Eva Mulema Matsiko from Kampala, Uganda, where I was a Fulbright Scholar once in a lovely city. Eva's a lawyer and an experienced program manager with more than 20 years of professional experience, including 16 years of experience providing strategic leadership, management, and technical expertise with USAID and DFID funded programs. From 2011 to 2019, she was chief of party for the Governance, Accountability, Participation, and Performance Program, a $35 million program jointly funded by USAID and DFID, which addressed leadership, accountability, and fiscal transparency, as well as local government, financial management, planning, and budgeting. Ms. Matsiko has also served as chief of party for the Strengthening Democratic Linkages in Uganda project and deputy chief of party for the Legislative Support Activity. Throughout her career, she has worked on service delivery in health, education, the rights of the poor, provision of opportunities, and leadership development for those who may not have easy access to basic services and goods. Our third panelist is Erin Chassie. Erin's nearly 35-year career has spanned over 40 countries and includes stints as a USAID Democracy and Governance Foreign Service Officer, Chief of Party, IDIQ Manager, and 10 years as a Senior Manager for INGOs. He has designed, implemented, and evaluated projects in multiple sectors, including community-based protected area management, civic engagement, democratic local governance, and people-to-people peace building. He led Catholic Relief Services Equity, Inclusion, and Peace Building team to produce alternatives to donor-funded approaches, which were based in counterterrorism policies. In addition to a Master of Public Policy from Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School of Government, Erin also holds a double BA from the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor. So I welcome all three panelists. I'm going to start with David and ask him to give us his 3 minutes, and then we'll move on to Eva and then to Erin. And then we will have time. I will be posing them some questions, and then you will get a chance to ask some questions as well.
Thank you very much, Chloe. And thanks to all the sponsors, the Center for Values and International Development, which I'm proud to be a part of, the Global Human Development Program at Georgetown. It's nice to come back to do a presentation at Georgetown, the School of Foreign Service, SID. It's good to be here on this very important topic. The Tale of Two Cities starts with, this is the best of times and the worst of times. I'm going to start with, this is the worst of times and the best of times. The worst of times because of the upsurge and strengthening of autocracy and authoritarianism and some fascism. Russia, China, Hungary, Nicaragua come to mind right away. But and also the repression and decay and shallowness of what is called democracy around the world. India, USA, Israel are examples of decay and often repression. But it's also the best of times, because there is a reinvigoration of democracy throughout the world. And some of it is traced to what we'll call deliberative democracy. Deliberative democracy, I'll define a little bit in a way, is multifaceted. It's a theory, a first generation theory from Jürgen Habermas and John Rawls and Joshua Cohen, and a second generation of theorists who are responding to criticisms and evolving and generating new approaches to deliberative democracy. And I would strongly recommend to all of you this very fine collection, Oxford Handbook of Deliberative Democracy, which not only deals with the theory, but also with another important dimension, and that is the practice, the innovations, the experimentations that have been occurring for 20 or 30 years around the world and are very exciting right now. But there's also empirical studies asking the question of what is the impact of deliberative democracy? Can it deliver the goods? Can it be practical and improve people's lives and their agency? And then deliberative democracy is also a movement. Some of that movement will be expressed in the summit. Some of it you know about. And one of the advantages of this handbook is it looks at deliberative democracy as it's occurring in many regions of the world, and not just in North America. So the challenge that Chloe put to me in the description of this event is, can and should deliberative democracy result in a more robust, inclusive, deeper, agency-driven democracy or not? Or is it too rationalistic, too elitist, too orderly for our messy, chaotic, unequal, post-truth, and increasingly tyrannical world? What is democracy, first of all? More or less rather than either or. There's no platonic form of democracy. There's more or less democracy and different kinds of democracy in different times in different places. What is deliberative democracy? Deliberative democracy, on my view, is an interpretation of one dimension of democracy as a more or less phenomenon. One approach that has been used since the Greek times is democracy is ruled by the people rather than by one individual or a small group. But there are many different dimensions of democracy, and deliberative democracy focuses largely on one, although it's been moving to make connections with all the other dimensions as well. One dimension is that of breadth. If it's ruled by the people, what people? Which people? Who's to be included and who's not to be included? And there's no platonic form for that. It varies in different places, and it also can be mistaken in different places. Another dimension of democracy is range. What is the range of the ruling that is done? What are the sites in which it is done and should be done? What are the topics that deliberative democracy deals with? And then is the ruling of democracy is more or less separated by powers, different powers within the society, both within the government. We think of executive, legislative, judicial, but also within civil society and the various new hybrid connections between government and civil society. Eva's work has been largely with working with governments and their structures and how they deliver the goods or fail to deliver the goods. And then another dimension of democracy is not just a matter of theory or a matter of talk, but a matter of having an impact on the world, changing the world in ways that are hopefully better than they were before. So a practical dimension. Behind all of the dimensions and their connection and relation is, I think, several values that we could call democratic ideals or democratic values. Individual agency of people running their own lives or being in charge of their government rather than having their government in charge of them. Solidarity of working together in some way or other. With mutual respect for fellow members of the group, whatever the group is, local or even international. Equality, because you can have individual agency with some people having a lot more power than others. And human well-being, of providing the hope, if not the reality, of a better life with respect to such things as good health, good safety. I've already used up my 3 minutes, more than enough. Perhaps in the I'm used to 50 minutes at least, right? During the question period, I will distinguish between 2 generations of deliberative democracy. What it started out as, what it has evolved in, and what is still contested. So I pass the baton back to Chloe.
Thank you so much, David. I will pass the baton to Eva in Kampala.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to others who may be online and who may be calling in from different places. It's really a pleasure to be with you this evening, my time, to talk about deliberative democracy. And when you read the literature on deliberative democracy, as was said by the previous speaker, there's a continuum, but in its most clinical sense, where there is an effort to get a group of people that reflect the public and have them sit down and deliberate a particular question, a particular policy issue, and then have them present their recommendations. That kind in my country, and I think in many African countries, is quite rare. what we have more is different spaces that have been created over time or have been pushed for over time, where citizens do get an opportunity to engage. And that varies, as you may know or know, it depends on the history of the country, the culture of the country. So the expression of it varies, the space that is available varies. And so the experiences vary also at the local, what is possible at the local, what's possible at the regional, and what's possible at the national levels. And of course, varies from country to country. So I'll be happy to share my thoughts on how I've seen it work or not work within our context, both at the local level, at the regional level, and at Parliament. I think deliberative democracy is an excellent ideal, and using the word ideal intentionally, because it is something we're working towards. And it's a space that we need to work towards, and we need to be deliberate and intentional about, or otherwise it slips out of our hands. So I think this discussion comes at a very good time, where we can, share thoughts on how to make this happen. Back to you, Claude.
Thanks so much, Eva. That's great. Aaron.
Yes, thank you very much. Again, thanks to all the sponsors and all the participants who are showing up from around the world, as well as right here in the room. Very grateful to Chloe and to our mutual friend, Bobby Herman, who couldn't make it today and suggested that I come in his place in case there's any confusion with the beards. He has hair, I don't. Okay, I'm going to thank you. Yes, I'm going to come at this question from my own professional experience, and to say 25 years ago, as a democracy and governance officer, I had the good fortune to work at USAID Guinea-Conakry, where the mission director, very nimble on his feet, realized that funding levels were going down both for his country and more generally for the Africa region, and he pivoted the entire country portfolio to one of promoting democratic local governance. And as the new kid on the block, my job then was to figure out, well, how do we strengthen civil society in all of the different technical areas that the USAID Guinea-Conakry mission was addressing through its strategic plan? And this experience taught me several important lessons, and that's what I'd like to speak about today. The first is, at the community level, the world is very small and people wear many hats. Particularly where I was in rural West Africa, where affinity-based ties of identity still shape relationships and guide access to both decision-making and power. Our partners, local civil society, even community-based organizations, so I'm talking about parent-teacher associations, health center management committees, natural resource management committees, these folks were the groups that we were trying to work with. And, what we realized was that these community-based organizations were the incubators of civic engagement and deliberative democratic local governance. And when we realized that the world was small was when, lo and behold, the same members of these community-based organizations, both in civil society and in the private sector, were also the members of the locally elected council. And they were the ones who said to the USAID implementing partners, hey, what you're doing for our rural cooperatives, our PTAs, et cetera, and so forth, we need in our local government unit. Could you come on over and help us out? Long story short, it took about 5 years to really get started, but with another 5 years over the 10-year period, this created a real bottom-up momentum for deliberative democratic local governance. Now, in case anybody wants to ask, is Guinea-Conakry now the poster child of good governance and democracy? Not by a long shot, but at the very least, there was a critical mass that eventually formed this constituency that knew better and that demanded better. And that's something. I think the lesson that came from that experience is my second point, which is you cannot demand of others what you do not do yourself. So if the demand from civil society and the private sector is we want more inclusive, more equitable, more accountable, more transparent governance, guess what? You got to do it yourself. Or as we've seen, as David mentioned, and others know very well, authoritarians are very good at showing that the so-called champions of democracy have got their own issues. They bring the skeletons out of the closet, or if there's no skeletons to be brought out, they'll create them. So, you really have to be the change you want to see in this world. I think the third lesson, and this is real important, is slow down. It's not about you. And what I mean is one of the academics that impressed me the most when I was first starting this journey almost 40 years ago was Joran Hayden, professor emeritus, I believe still at University of Florida, who wrote, I thought, a seminal work, 1983, No Shortcuts to Progress, Development Management and Perspectives. And he said, look, we cannot, because of our own institutional exigencies, insist that somehow we're going to build institutions from the bottom up in 5-year project cycles or even 10-year project cycles. In fact, more importantly, we have to understand that if you will, the values, the real institutions that are at the foundation of all this have been around for hundreds of years. And no doubt, the experience under colonial administration really shaped those. So I'm not advocating that somehow we go back to pre-colonial times, because you can't walk that horse back into the barn. Societies in the global South have changed immutably. Underdevelopment is a reality. And so in order to be able to come up with an approach that is going to be able to address those drivers of underdevelopment, rather than thinking about these issues in terms of project cycles, let's think about them more in terms of people-to-people efforts, whether it's enterprise to enterprise, government to government, nonprofit to nonprofit. And it's that sort of solidarity-based model that I think is going to achieve, in the end, the kind of durable results that all of our development programs are meant to achieve. And so I guess I would close out by saying we have to be patient. We have to realize it's not about us. And as a good friend of mine once said, what's the difference between God and me? God doesn't go around all day thinking he's me. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Aaron. I'm going to ask a few questions to the panelists, but we will also reserve time for people in the physical audience, but also online as well. I'm going to start off really by asking a question about what drives development, and particularly deliberative developments. What also most stands in the way of moving deliberative development forward? Does deliberative democracy need to begin by explicitly establishing a willingness to proceed through some form of social contract, in other words, rules of the game, that generates the requisite equality and fairness needed between participants? How do we get this started? How do we keep it going? I'm going to move to Eva first to respond to that, and then to David, and then to Aaron.
Thank you, Chloe. So I think what drives deliberative democracy is in many countries, some systems, some processes, some spaces were created as they were being formed, their constitutions, their colonial legacy, all that has played into how deliberative democracy works in the countries as they are right now. Even the cultural practices and the tradition all inform that. But in addition to that, other things have driven it further. It's the kind of leadership that's in institutions. There are leaders that have been progressive and welcoming. It's the kind of other external support, illustrations of learning from elsewhere that have changed how institutions work. I worked with Parliament of Uganda for a couple of years, and I realized that there are many things that were started that created spaces in Uganda's parliament that were not there before, but were coming from elsewhere through different actors, through development practitioners, bringing good experiences from elsewhere. So even these experiences that are brought in countries such as ours are able to expand the envelope, are able to expand the practices and to nurture good practices. So I think those are good ways in which it starts. And should we wait until we have the social contract? I think no. I think we take the space that is available, and where there is no space, we try to create space. Because if we wait for it to happen, though a lot has changed since then, sometimes the space closes in different ways. It doesn't mean the open forums don't happen, the invitations are not issued out to civil society and others to come and make presentations, but they may miss on that list the more controversial, quote unquote, civil society from being invited before the committee. So there are other ways to keep people out, more sophisticated ways to keep people out. So those are the new ways we have to watch out for. I think I'll stop there and back to you, Chloe.
Thank you, Eva. Take the space that's available, David.
Yeah, I really didn't finish my 5 dimensions of democracy, and that the 5th dimension is the how do the people rule? How do they govern? And of course, there's lots of ways. We don't really think of balloting and voting for representatives who would represent our views. And that's one important way that is increasingly embraced by deliberative democracy. But the idea of deliberative democracy is that the people have a role, as Eva indicated, of talking together, coming up with recommendations that would influence their own group or the government or both. And one way of talking about deliberative democracy would be it's grounded in an ideal in which people come together on the basis of equal status and mutual respect to discuss the political issues or practical issues that they face. And on the basis of these discussions, decide on policies that will affect their lives. So it has a very practical outcome, but it is a communal effort to come up together. And I think that the biggest obstacle that we face right now is the great divide that we see in various countries, where people cannot agree on rules of the game, and the whole idea of deliberating together would be rejected because it would be something that you would have to compromise your values. So how can we overcome that? And in some cases we can't. That is, we got to be careful that we don't see deliberative democracy as a new solution for everything. Or it's not what Mayor Daley of Chicago said, a pancreas.
Well, that high note, I'll move this on to Aaron.
Goodness me. Convening people, I think, is easier more on the practical questions, livelihood, local economic development, certainly at the local level. Here's the challenge, though. The desire or the demand for democracy is not going to cut it, because we are dealing with societies that went through however many decades of colonial administration, which was characterized by a divide and rule strategy that instrumentalized historic grievances and formed and hardened narratives of division. And so we've talked a little bit about social contract, but I think we need to talk a little bit more about social cohesion, which is to, again, identify those interests that connect people together while mitigating the dividers, which is to say those issues or those interests that push people apart. So at the very least, we're able to take away this tool that we see used all too often, not just by authoritarians, but as has been mentioned, the various more or less democratic governing regimes to divide and rule. So that's one. I think the second thing is to appreciate that in many of these societies, the state is still what Haydn calls a floating superstructure. Okay, not to say there is not a presence of the state in these local communities, but it does not in an administrative sense, have a positive benefit or a positive impact on their daily lives. And so this is where I think, frankly, with a lot of donor-funded programs, we're seeing the same mistake I saw 20, 25 years ago. It's stovepiping, in a word. You know, we've got the civil society programming over here. We've got the private sector development programming over there. And over here, we have the governance programming. And yeah, there's been some efforts to try to bring them together. But Norman Uphoff wrote a piece over, 30 years ago, where, I mean, this really shaped my thinking, where he laid out this beautiful 3-column by a gazillion row matrix, which showed you had public sector, you had private sector, you had collective action sector or civil society, and the row headings were the various levels going right down below the community and looking at, well, how do we fill those cells in that matrix, okay? And the idea is there's no silver bullet, but no, it's the interaction of the different sectors. It's the interaction up and down the different levels. And that's tough because the way donor agencies are structured, it's very rigid. Even within a particular area of programming, there are stovepipes within stovepipes. And so I think we need to get into a more interdisciplinary frame of mind for people who feel like going down some rabbit holes in the development experience clearinghouse. You'll never get back, trust me, unless you lay breadcrumbs, as it were. But around 2000, Richard Blue, Hal Lipman, Donald Muncie, among others, wrote a series of case studies on cross-sectoral democracy and governance programming. To me, they're still the go-to because it illustrates exactly what I'm fumbling around trying to communicate, which is there is this interdisciplinary cross-sectoral approach, especially at the bottom-up democratic, deliberative, local governance approach that is effective, but it does require patience. And that's not about big investment of money, but big investment of time. And again, taking a step back, and it's not about us.
Thank you, Aaron. Time, patience, these are challenges, particularly challenge of equality that David mentioned earlier on. I led a deliberative democracy process in Durban in South Africa, just as Nelson Mandela came into power in South Africa, and trying to get Zulu people to be in a deliberative forum with very powerful white interests along the coast there was a really huge challenge. Zulu people were not used to that environment. They weren't used to engaging in that space. It took patience, it took time, but we made extraordinary progress. You know, in that context, I really like to challenge the notion of asymmetries of power. We often have very entrenched systems of power that really control governance and decision-making. What can deliberative Democrats do to ensure that all stakeholder voices are listened to and given appropriate weight in these deliberations, and that the decisions made by such deliberative Democrats have legitimacy? I'm going to start with Aaron and work backwards again this time.
Thank you very much. Now, this is the issue that I grappled with a lot in designing and implementing programs, both in governance and in building peace. We throw out words like grassroots, community level, and think, okay, well, that's where it stops. Now we don't have to worry about it because we're at this idyllic place where everybody joins arms and sings Kumbaya and in multi-part harmony. And it's simply not true. Indeed, the same dynamics that divide people and prevent the deliberative governance process that others have spoken so eloquently to exist right there at the community level. So again, the idea is recognizing that the world is a very complex place, yes, even at that local level, including and especially the power dynamics. And what we need to do, again, is to take almost a Saul Alinsky, Paulo Freire approach, grassroots organizing, finding those issues where people have common ground, common interest. And here's the big thing that I would say, we need to shift the paradigm from power over, which again, legacy of colonial administration right up till the present, some 60 plus years later, to power with. Just as David said earlier, the value of solidarity, it's not standing behind people, it's standing directly next and with people.
It's really helpful. Thank you. Eva, what do you think about this?
Yes, you know, the differences in power go all the way to the grassroots. And even in the grassroots, sometimes we assume that if we call the women and we call the youth and we call the, we have everyone under the mango tree, so to speak, to have this conversation. But the reality is, and a recent project showed that, you see, the very poor in that community are not seated under the mango tree. There are people not seated under the mango tree because at that time they're also digging in other people's gardens. They can't be under the same mango tree with whoever has allowed them to dig their gardens. So even at the very, like you rightly said, those power imbalances are there. And I think it is intentionality. It's intentionality and trying to see the world out of frame of the less powerful. How do you step back and try to see the world, whatever the space is going to be? If it's going to be under the mango tree, how do they perceive the mango tree? How do I make the mango tree more comfortable? If they're going before, we held public hearings where Parliament would come down to communities and try to have them give their views on how services can be improved and how accountability works and things like that. And what we found was, just that they are members of Parliament there in itself was very intimidating. Even if they were Ugandans of similar tribe, of some from that region, it was really, we had to work and coach beforehand the people who were willing to step forward. And then we had to work with the members of Parliament in turn and say, look, you're taking this for granted. You overwhelm them by your presence. You overwhelm them by your comments. Can you speak less, allow them to speak more? So it's almost like working behind the scenes on both sides to get a dialogue going. And when we are privileged, we take many things for granted. And we need to step back and help each other see what other people see in us that makes them intimidated. So it's an intentionality that has to happen. And I think it can't be rushed.
Thank you, Eva. Of course, I would like to add to that the dimension of, there's a gender dimension under that tree as well.
Yes, absolutely.
David.
One of the most exciting innovations in the deliberative democracy movement is what's called mini publics. And this is gathering together an assembly of people. It could be within a union, it could be within an educational institution, it could be within a women's group, it could be within an LGBTQ group. The question is how to assemble them. One way is to have everybody come who wants to come. The problem there is that you're likely to get activists from different sides that will come and dispute with each other and not make much progress. Another option would be to invite people to come, but often those who would do the inviting would be inviting an elite themselves that will be part of the power structure. One thing that the Athenians did that always struck most of us as odd was what's called sortition, random selection of people. And that so that there would be drawing straws at a certain time of the year as to who would be a judge or on a jury. And this is being tried in various places where a random selection of people, they may not be activists, they may not be interested in some issues, but especially interested in issues like hunger, employment, repression, And it may be that that could be facilitated in such a way and not look for consensus. One of the first generation views was that everybody agreed. And increasingly, I think there's the idea that disagreement, even if it's not resolved by deliberation, can teach us what the other person is thinking and can be resolved, if it's resolved at all, by some kind of compromise, so that you hear out the other person, learn how to listen, and try to get a solution that they can live with, even though it's not something that you completely agree with. And here's where the deliberative democracy tradition is learning a lot from negotiation, union negotiation. And so the idea of absolute consensus needs to be shelved in most cases, although when you can get it, it's great. But when you can't, you need to look for another way. So I think this is the best way to say overcome in the United States right now. The deep division is to have random selection, invite people to come on a given practical issue that they're concerned with, and avoid trying to get everybody to agree on rules of the game. Accept the importance of the game of talking to each other and listening to each other. And I just wanted to add that part of Chloe's approach in the Center for Values is that the values that I mentioned are in some way undergirded by the value of human dignity. Why should we invite these people that we know we are likely to disagree with? Because they're human beings with their own lives and their own dignity that we need to respect. So the idea of mutual respect becomes very important as a part of the solidarity that I talked about.
Thank you, David. Just picking up on that, USA can play a particular role as being a facilitator who sets some of the rules. I'm thinking of a project in northern Uganda dealing with basically cattle rustling, pastoral people stealing cattle from each other with great violence. The local people said, sure, we can have a deliberative process about this. We'll get the men together. And USA said, no, you will get the women together as well. And there was a great debate about this because this had not been done before. And USA was very adamant that this needed to be done. So finally, they did set up a process, but it was under two different mango trees, women under one, men under the other. And one of the biggest takeaways early on was the men were astounded that the women had such thoughtful inputs. They just had never thought to ask the women. So even that, just creating that sense of there are many stakeholders here who have important views that need to be listened to, many of whom we may never have thought about inviting before. So this is a really important space for that opportunity to learn about that equal human dignity in places where we haven't looked and we should have. I'm going to open it up now to see if there's any questions in the room here, and also look to Grace to see if she can pick up any online questions and help me with those, maybe just by summarizing those as well. I see one right here. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Natalie. I'm a master's student, PhD. I'm actually also going to be entering USA as an SDV officer. But I was kind of wondering, we talked a lot about democracy here, but I'm kind of wondering about how to implement these, like, what kind of context specifically, like, are we talking about implementing these types of projects? My whole background is in the Middle East. And as we know, the Middle East has some problems with democracy. And I'm kind of wondering how, how you implement projects in areas where maybe the people are very interested in democracy and the governments don't want to hear it, or vice versa. And then I'm also wondering how projects now, especially after the Afghanistan and Iraq war, that deal with democracy can be like implemented. I think that what I'm saying is the world's lost a lot of trust in projects that have the word democracy in it after the two wars. And I was just kind of wondering how projects can kind of address our bumpy past with democracy in those regions. and still then be implemented.
What a great question, Natalie. I'm going to ask Eva to respond to this first.
Thank you. So you mentioned about the issue where trust has been lost, and there are many, the things people want haven't changed. They want water, they want access to pasture, they want health services, etc. And they want to be heard if they have concerns, and they want those concerns to be addressed. And there are a number of projects now that are not using the word governance, they're not using the word democracy, but they're working within these sectors to make sure these things happen. And they're using the same practices and procedures to make sure they happen, to get citizens heard, where would they want the borehole as opposed to where, and things like that. So if we get rid of the terminology and look at what people really want and help them get those things through functioning governance systems, I think we are able to meet their need without using the terminology that they stumble with. Back to you, Claude.
Thank you so much. Aaron, what do you think?
I think Ava's done a brilliant job. I mean, it's what we call the indirect approach, right? It's about where's the entry point? Is the entry point a standalone democracy and governance project? Probably in the context you're describing, no. And as Ava described, there's other entry points in areas where people see a more tangible, concrete interest in participating. The other part of your question, it may be 15 years ago, I would have been able to say in sub-Saharan Africa, not so much an issue, but it is, and it has been because of the militarized or the militarization of US foreign assistance that has been taking place, certainly since 9/11, but even before then, if we're really, truly honest with ourselves. Because let's remember, US foreign assistance is a part of, and more importantly, it is a tool of US foreign policy. There is, the sort of belief for however long that USAID is an independent agency and it just focuses on sound international development practices. I don't think that was ever the case, quite frankly, if you look at why USAID was created some 60 plus years ago. And it certainly hasn't been the case in the last 20 plus years, where you've gotten, at the policy level talks about full government or 3D, diplomacy, defense, and development, and maybe a little D, fourth D at the end, democracy. And people see right through it, quite frankly. So I don't have a good answer for how you are able to get through that context where clearly the US has discredited itself as the donor and as the shining city on the hill for democratic development. I think instead you just meet people where they are, right? And as Ava was saying, get from them the idea of what's their vision, what are their preferences, what are their demands, and you build up on that, whether that's through democracy and governance programming or other areas of programming or a combination. You have to be nimble enough to be able to do that. I'm happy to talk with you more afterwards. There's a lot there in that question.
David, you've got the last minute.
Well, something that Aaron and Eva both kind of touched on is the role of leadership. And here I think it's really important that that international development be integrally connected to democracy in the programming and all. But both of them stressed how important it is for people involved with USAID to live out their values in their relationships to their own colleagues and to the recipients of who really become co-workers.
Yeah.
And you can't shove democracy down the throat of anybody. It's got to be something that they're invited to be part of. And I think because they are randomly selected at the outset, and probably the place of entry that is most important is to get the most urgent local problems that have connection to national problems as well, and to get people to try to prioritize what's most important. And to do that, you've got to give reasons, and you got to listen to other people and see what they think, and be ready to make compromises because you can't do everything, and to make those decisions together, and to not have USAID make them, but to facilitate the local community being involved in making them.
Thank you, David. We have literally run out of time. There's so much more to say. One of the takeaway lessons here is to not have this as 60-minute, but 90 minutes is a minimum. I want to still take some time to thank RTI for providing refreshments for those who are here. For those online, I can tell you there's really good stuff here. You should be here. I would like to thank all of our panelists, and I would like to thank SID for being absolutely instrumental in making this all happen. For those of you who have questions online, I will try to respond to those as the Center for Values, and we'll try to get some sort of response to you from those subsequent to this, because I know that it's important to keep this discourse going. I would like to end with David's exhortation about living your values. I think that's central to all of the work we do in development. It's certainly, definitely including deliberative democracy. So thank you all, and we look forward to keeping this deliberation going.
Could I have one final word?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Abraham Lincoln inspired all of us that this nation shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. And that is a danger that we have of its perishing in our country and throughout the world. And the by the people part of it is something that deliberative democracy contributes as much as anything, not ignoring of the people and for the people.
Thank you, David. Well ended. Thank you all.